addressing alcohol and drug issues in the community. We don't do counseling or education. Really, that's not our focus. What we do is try to engage community members and give them tools to work on local policies to make it harder for youth and adults to access certain drugs like spice and bath salts, which are the drugs I'll be talking with you about today. How many of you are familiar with spice? What about bath salts? No. Okay.
Like, what do you mean, like the
Have you
people
heard
getting
of
high
it?
off of them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've
Like
heard
people
that.
using them as drugs?
I've heard the bath
Oh,
salts,
yeah.
but not the spices.
Okay, that's usually the extent of what people know. They just know it's a drug, especially a few months ago after there was a man who tried to chew off another man's face because he was high on bath salts, and I'm not sure if you guys heard of that. So that gained a lot of attention, and a lot of people started talking about what these drugs are. So that's what I'm going to talk with you about. Briefly, we work in communities all throughout San Bernardino County, and I'm going to list them to see what cities we work in. I'm based here in the high desert, so that's why I'm giving this presentation tonight. I'm going to go over what these drugs are, the availability, where they're sold, local, state, and countywide and national laws regulating the sale and use of these drugs. We'll also talk about some of the case studies of people who have had negative side effects from using these drugs, symptoms, that sort of stuff. So if you just want to hold your questions to the end, because I have to go through a lot of information, that would be great. Spice and bath salts are synthetic drugs. What that means is they're man-made drugs. They're created in a lab. They are not naturally found, and they're also referred to as designer drugs because they're designed to replicate the effects of other types of drugs. So when I'm talking about bath salts, man-made, they were made to replicate the effects of cocaine, methamphetamine, and PCP. And then with spice is actually created at Clemson University by a researcher who was studying the effects of THC, which is one of the main properties found in marijuana. And they were studying ways for using synthetic marijuana as some type of treatment for cancer patients and other patients who currently seek marijuana as a pain reliever or something of that nature. So these drugs first started in Europe as a club drug, replacing ecstasy, and then they started moving here to the U.S. in around 2008 and 2009, and that was the first time that any government officials first came across shipments of spice and bath salts, and also when they first started hearing about cases of people being treated in hospitals or calling poison control centers to seek treatment. So you don't hear a lot of reports from government agencies. There's not a lot of studies conducted to tell people about the long-term health effects of these drugs. So we're just now learning about what these drugs are, how they affect people, and where they're available. So I'm going to pass around some packages of spice and bath salts. Don't open them, don't try that. But I just want to pass them around so you know how to identify these drugs and you know what they look like. Spice, people often get confused when I say spice or bath salts. They think it's some type of herb when I'm talking about spice. And then with bath salts, they think it's some powder or crystals that people typically use to soak in their bathtub. These are not the same things. These are drugs that are sold under the name spice and bath salts. So with spice, it's actually a mixture of plants and herbs. Manufacturers can use any type of plant or herb. And what they do is they spray it with synthetic cannabinoids, and that is the synthetic marijuana that I was referring to earlier. It's the synthetic chemicals, the synthetic cannabinoids that's sprayed onto the plants that actually produces the high and get somebody intoxicated. With bath salts, they come in a pure form. They don't contain any plants or herbs. It's just a powder or a crystal substance, and you can see in the little container passed around called bubbles, that is bath salts. Spice is typically sold in foil packaging packages, like you see here on the screen, and that's being passed around. Also, sometimes they're sold in the little clear lip balm containers, like the Mr. Marley. And then with bath salts, you'll almost always see them in the little lip gloss-like containers sold in a ½ gram, sometimes a gram. And if they are sold in a foil package similar to Spice, the foil package usually contains these glass vials of bath salts. So I mentioned that Spice was created to mimic the effects of marijuana, but it's actually a lot stronger than marijuana. It's 50 to 500 times stronger than marijuana. And the reason why it's so much stronger is because of the chemicals used in Spice. So there are over 60 different individual synthetic chemicals that manufacturers can choose from. And basically they can choose whatever chemicals they want to mix together, and depending on what chemicals they choose to use, how much of each chemical, and the reaction between those two chemicals, it's always going to vary in the strength and the effect that it has on somebody who's smoking Spice. And that brings up how it's used. It's generally used in the same manner as marijuana. It's smoked in joints, in pipes, and bongs. And it's caused death from one-time use, a lot different than marijuana. With bath salts, they, like I said, they are similar to P and PCP, cocaine, and they're used in the similar ways. They're either snorted, injected, but most commonly they're used in pills or they're snorted. So you'll notice there's a tagline on almost all of the Spice and bath salts packages that say not for human consumption. The reason why it has that little label on there is because manufacturers and retailers want to make it seem like they're not selling these drugs for people to consume or use as a drug. Another reason why they have that label on there is because there's an analog law, a federal law that says if a substance is similar in structure and effect to an illegal or controlled substance like cocaine or methamphetamine, then that substance can be treated in the same way. It would therefore be illegal if somebody had it in their possession or was caught selling it. Only if that substance is intended for human consumption. If it's not intended for human consumption, then it doesn't fall under the federal analog law. So retailers, manufacturers are not being held liable for selling these drugs because they're selling it as not for human consumption. You'll notice that the packages will say herbal incense, potpourri, the bath salts little lip balm container said glass cleaner. They will sell these products as many different things. They could sometimes call it shoe deodorizer. There's a new brand of bath salts on the market called ladybug repellent. So they'll just think of any type of name to try to get away with selling these drugs and make it seem like they're not selling a drug. But typically every retailer, every store owner who sells these drugs, they know what the use is for, what it's intended for, and they continue to sell it in their stores. Another way to tell the difference between actual bath salts or glass cleaner and these drugs is the price. If you were to take a 30-ounce container of real bath salts and replace that with the drugs sold as bath salts, that container would cost around $51,000. So it's a lot more expensive. The little lip balm container of bath salts was sold to us for $35. So this is a huge industry right now in the U.S. It's a $5 billion industry for Spice and bath salts. I'm going to show you a clip of a retailer. He's being questioned as to why he's selling jewelry cleaner, which is actually bath salts, in his store.
The bath salt ban goes into effect on Monday, making it illegal across the state. But already a new product on the market could be taking its place. It's novelty jewelry cleaner. Dan Kerrigan has more.
What interest do you guys have in selling a jewelry cleaning product?
I will be receiving my gold chains and rings next week.
And I guess that's why.
I need jewelry cleaner. Right.
That is what this shop owner
is that spray paint has an actual legitimate use and bath salts do not. They're only used for one purpose, and that's to get somebody high or intoxicated. So not a very strong argument from that man. Another thing about these drugs is they're not regulated. There is no FDA regulation determining what goes into these products, if the ingredients or chemicals are safe for human consumption. Mentioned earlier, there's no preclinical studies to determine what type of effects these have on people. So really, we're just learning as we go, and we're getting a lot of anecdotal information from law enforcement, hospitals, doctors, substance abuse counselors, and it's just as addictive as other controlled substances. And unfortunately, it's marketed towards kids. So you can see this package of Mad Monkey. This is a really popular brand of spice that's sold here in the high desert. You'll also see another brand called Monster, and it actually uses the Monster energy drink label on their package. And then the package going around that Knockout looks very similar to a Pop Rocks or a candy package, and they do that on purpose to entice kids. They also sell these drugs in grape bubble gum, cherry flavor, all to try to get kids to try these drugs. This is a picture of Scooby Snacks, the actual gummy snacks, and then on the right is the picture of Spice being sold with the Scooby-Doo cartoon character on it. Another thing about these drugs is that the chemicals that are used to make spice and bath salts, they are not detected on standard drug tests. So that means if somebody goes into the ER or they're arrested by law enforcement and they're given a regular drug test, their drug test is going to come up completely clean. And that's a huge problem right now for doctors and law enforcement, especially about a year ago when this drug first started showing up on the streets and people started using these drugs. People were baffled. They didn't know what was going on. People were experiencing symptoms and showing similar effects, like they were on meth or cocaine, and yet the drug test came up clean. So it's also another reason why it's gaining popularity among people who are on probation, kids who are youth, who are athletes and get randomly drug tested. Huge problem with the military right now, so another reason why it's gaining popularity is because it does not come up on standard drug tests. These are some of the side effects for spice and bath salts. Most generally, people will report that they have anxiety attacks, increased heart rate, seizures. We work with a youth coalition, high school group of kids. One girl reported that her friend actually had a seizure right next to her after she smoked spice. Another young man said his friend was running down the street because he thought somebody was chasing after him. So you'll also see people hallucinating when they're on spice. Some folks will have just a euphoric high similar to marijuana, but it also depends on what brand they smoke, how much they're smoking, that sort of thing. With bath salts, similar effects. Increased heart rate, but that instead of just hallucination, you have severe psychosis where people are completely out of touch with reality. High body temperatures, people going into ER departments reported 103 to 110 temperature because they're just the way that the chemicals are reacting with their body. Also PCP-like strength, so this is a problem for law enforcement. We've talked to deputies up here in the high desert. There was an incident a few months ago with 4 deputies. They tasered a man twice who was high on bath salt, and he had no reaction, no effect on him, and it took 4 deputies to finally restrain him after tasering him twice. Again, with the PCP-like strength, when these people are admitted to hospitals, it's a different situation. We've heard from doctors who have to use sedatives 10 to 20 times more than what they would use on somebody who's going into surgery. So these drugs are very, very strong and have some very severe side effects on folks. This is some data from poison control centers. You can see from just 1 year, 2000 to 2011, the numbers jumped significantly for spice, and the same thing for bath salts. Only 300 calls in 2010, and then in 2011, almost 7,000 calls. I'm going to show you a clip of a young man who just graduated from San Diego High School, Unified School District, and smoked spice.
Over the last few weeks, KUSI has aired a series of special reports about a new designer drug called Spice.
It's sold as an herbal incense, but the teens and adults who use spice are smoking it for a marijuana-like high. Tonight, KUSI's Sasha Fu tells us about a growing movement to get it banned.
Alan and Sandra, in California, the synthetic drug called Spice isn't regulated and it's easy to find, making this a tough battle for those who want to keep their children away from spice. It goes by the name of Spice, and many parents are just learning about it.
If you to ask me about spice, I would have told you to go to the grocery store and look on the shelf.
Last week, Dan Sanchez got a crash course, learning much more about the synthetic marijuana that sent his 17-year-old son to the hospital suffering from cardiac arrest. Doctors warn that spice can also induce seizures, even psychosis. Dan's son, who doesn't want his face shown, told us he had no idea that smoking spice might cost him his life.
I didn't know whether to yell, scream, or cry. I was afraid that I was going to lose my son.
Other parents say the biggest problem with spice is its easy access.
We don't want our children to have this product.
The drug is legal, sold as herbal incense or potpourri, and available in mini marts, liquor stores, even some gas stations. The Drug Enforcement Administration notes there's no age restriction. Anyone at any age is allowed to buy it.
And they're not even checking to see if you're 18 like they do tobacco products.
These Chula Vista parents want stores to stop selling the dangerous drug. Eliza Martin and William Perno zeroed in on the deli right next to their children's middle school.
And I talked to some kids and found out that they were buying it at the deli.
The parents pressed the deli manager to stop selling the drug, but just 1 week after the manager promised to do that, Eliza's 20-year-old daughter was able to walk out with a jar of spice.
And it's sad that people are selling it just to get back.
The next day, the parents went back and persuaded the manager to take out all the stock of spice. Their first victory, but not the last.
Hey, you're a customer buying this businessman now, you know.
1 week later, they set their sights on the Shell gas station in Chula Vista, the same place where Dan's 17-year-old son bought the spice that sent him to the hospital.
Yes, how irritating it is.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, really bad.
We found spice next to the candy and even a small sample right on the walk-up window. So you can see that clerk, he knew what it was, but he continued to sell it. And unfortunately, that young man was celebrating the graduation, and that's what he had to go through. But luckily, he didn't overdose, he didn't commit suicide. This is a case of ex-military man. Him and his wife were actually both under the influence of bath salts when they led police on a high-speed chase. You can see their cars on rims. The husband eventually crashed the car, had a loaded gun in the car, shot his wife, committed suicide. Police looked through the car, found white powder all in the car. They went back to the couple's home to investigate what the couple was using, and they found their 5-year-old boy had been suffocated with a plastic bag over his head. The house turned upside down, and again, bath salts in the house. They did a toxicology test on the couple and found that they had high levels of bath salts in their system. So all of this induced from the psychosis and paranoia from bath salts. Another incident of bath salts, this young man was very addicted to bath salts, had been taking it for a few months. Both of his parents were actually medical doctors, had no idea what these drugs were. He was at home, he was hallucinating, his father was in the kitchen with him, and at some point during their conversation, the son grabbed a knife, tried to commit suicide with the knife, and the father rushed him to the hospital. Doctors drug tested him, and the drug test came up clean. The son was in no state to tell the doctors what he had been using or what was going on, so they kept him under observation for a while. They sent him home after a few hours, told his father to keep him on suicide watch, so his father slept next to his son's bed, and sometime during the night, his son got up, found a loaded gun in the garage, and committed suicide. That is a common thing that we see with bath salts, is that people experience severe hallucinations and psychosis. They think they're seeing demons, people are after them, and they feel like the only way they can get out of it is by killing themselves.
sometimes these episodes will go in and out. People will have reoccurring episodes. So law enforcement now is actually isolating people under the influence of bath salts when they arrest them, because people will have those symptoms, they'll have the PCP-like strength, hallucinate for a few hours, and then they'll be fine for an hour or two. And it seems like the drug is worn off, and then it will come back, and that's what happened with this young man. These are some of the stages of bath salts. So somebody might have a euphoric feeling at the beginning, mild hallucinations, depending on how much they've taken. It may increase to paranoia. And then you have the excited delirium where they're very aggravated, they have the high body temperatures, they're sweating, increased heart rate. And then we went over some of the safety risks that are associated with those. These are some of the signs and symptoms from people on spice and bath salts. With people who are using or under the influence of bath salts, they will have very similar body mannerisms to somebody on meth or PCP. They'll have the body tremors where they'll just be, you know, you've seen people on meth or cocaine. With somebody on spice, very similar to what somebody would look like high on marijuana. I'm going to skip over this video. So these are some more stats for California. You can see a large number of people were admitted to psychiatric wards. Our units when they went to the hospital to seek treatment. And for California, around 70% of the people who call into poison control centers are between the ages of, I believe it was 17 to 35, so very young population, and a majority of those people are males. Also, a growing trend in high schools. The University of Michigan conducted a study in 2011. They found that synthetic marijuana or spice is now the second most used illicit drug behind marijuana. So it's gaining popularity among youth. One, because it doesn't come up on drug tests, because it's sold widely throughout communities. It's labeled as 100% legal. It looks very fun. The packaging makes it look like it's not a harmful drug. So there are a lot of reasons why youth are trying these drugs and have access to them. Going back to the lack of data, there is not a lot of knowledge. People are just starting to learn about these drugs and side effects. I'm going to give a presentation to ER staff at Victor Valley Community Hospital next week because they're not tracking people who are being admitted to their ERs properly. Same thing with law enforcement. We've been working with law enforcement because they're not tracking people who are being arrested under the influence of spice or bath salts. And a lot of school resource officers we're working with because they don't know how to identify these drugs, they don't know what they look like, or what to look for when somebody's under the influence of these drugs. Unfortunately, you can buy the bulk chemicals to make spice and bath salts on the internet. You can also buy the actual already made products on the internet, so it's very easy to get a hold of and to make. So there's no cook method needed, so it's really just a matter of mixing a few chemical powders together, and if you're making spice, diluting it with some type of acetone and spraying it on plants. And if it's bath salts, it's really just mixing the powders together and packaging it. So it's fairly easy to make, but again, we're talking about chemicals and people just mixing chemicals without having any background in chemistry or anything like that. They're just selling it, not knowing what type of effects it's going to have on someone. So the young man who went into cardiac arrest and bought spice from the Shell gas station, this is how they were selling the spice and bath salts, right in the middle of the candy. And that's not abnormal for stores to do that. Sarah and I, this is my colleague Sarah, she actually went out with me to these smoke shops and liquor stores to see who was selling them in the high desert, and we really didn't have to go any further than 3 miles from each store to find spice throughout the whole high desert. People were advertising these products on the side of their buildings, large banners that said Spice sold here, pages, ads in the Penny Saver advertising these products. And you can find them at many different places, but most commonly gas stations, liquor stores, and smoke shops. Last week I just got a call from a community member who said that they had seen Spice sold at a Valero gas station. So really they're everywhere. No age limit on who can purchase these drugs. Spice typically starts at $9 and then it goes up depending on how much and the brand. With bath salts, it says $20 here because in some areas you can find it that cheap, but in the high desert you really can't find it for less than $30. So the DEA has placed a temporary ban on Spice, but you can see there's only 5 chemicals listed, and earlier I mentioned there's over 60 different synthetic chemicals that manufacturers can use. So what's happening now is that manufacturers are putting those labels on the packages that says does not contain, and they'll list the chemicals depending on what state they're in, what state banned what chemicals, and it'll say 100% legal. So they're just continuously looking for substitute chemicals, and they have a lot to choose from. Federal legislation is a little bit stronger than the DEA's temporary ban. It actually addresses over 20 some synthetic chemicals, but still a lot of loopholes in the law. California, there's no ban on personal possession, so somebody can walk around with these drugs in their possession and they can't be charged by law enforcement. So just imagine if we had laws for meth and cocaine where people were allowed to walk around possessing those drugs. You see a lot more use on the streets. These are some of the cities that have addressed locally what they want to do. They've been passing stronger laws to stop the sale of spice and bath salts. And so what's going on in the high desert is we have a high desert community coalition that has been working since February, January to address this issue. They actually went out into smoke shops, and there's an article in the back of your fact sheet of when they went out to the smoke shops. They gained a lot of media attention about the sale of these drugs. And from those efforts, law enforcement finally went out to the stores and told stores that you cannot sell spice or bath salts under California law. Before that, law enforcement wasn't doing anything. They didn't know what stores were selling it. They were just letting these owners openly sell and advertise these drugs in our community. So the coalition has been doing a lot of work. Even though law enforcement went out and gave the warning letters to store owners, some stores are still selling these drugs under the counter. They'll keep them in a back room, in a box underneath shelves so you can't see. So community members are still looking to go into these stores and determine what stores are selling these products, and then work with law enforcement to get these stores to stop selling it. And then the city of Adelanto passed an ordinance about a month ago to ban the personal possession, and they can actually now revoke a store's business license if they're caught selling spice or bath salts. Does anybody have any questions? Because that was a lot of information.
I actually do. You were saying in the beginning how a lot of these bath salts and spices, the people that are consuming them, it doesn't show up on drug tests. But for some of the people, like the couple that had suffocated their child, you said in a toxicology report it shows up. Does it depend on the drug test? Like, does it have to be blood drawn or like urine?
It can be both, but there are specialized tests that are now coming out on the market. And the issue with those specialized tests is they only capture the most popular synthetic chemicals that are being used right now. So some police departments have really great crime labs and drug labs where they can test for multiple synthetic chemicals. With the incident of the man that attacked the homeless man, and people thought he was on bath salts, and then it came out in the news he wasn't on bath salts. We actually looked into that, and the police department only had a specialized test that captured 5 synthetic chemicals that are used for bath salts. So it's still really unknown if that guy was on bath salts or not because they didn't have a great test. And that's just because these are new emerging drugs and drug test manufacturers haven't really caught up with what manufacturers are doing. And they're really expensive, that's another issue. So the probation department up here actually had to get a grant to get specialized tests, and then again, the specialized tests don't capture all the synthetic chemicals, so it's hit and miss.
Why don't we have any laws or ordinances that, I guess, control the manufacturing of bath salts or spices until we can finally get like a vote out to outlaw them altogether?
Well, the federal and state law does address manufacturing, but it's just a matter of manpower, and they say you cannot manufacture these certain chemicals. So still there are loopholes in even addressing the production of these drugs. And it's believed that a lot of these drugs are coming from Europe as well. So it's a big drug trade, just like any other controlled substance out there. It's hard to control. But the DEA actually did do a bust in a home in San Diego when federal law passed a few weeks ago, and they found 4 young men who were making spice and bath salts in their home in San Diego County, and they were between the ages of 20 and 21, and they were running a huge manufacturing of spice and bath salts in their home. So, I mean, it's hard to determine who's doing that when it's so easy to purchase and make in your home. So with that, if you have any questions, here's my contact information. We are always looking for people to become involved in this campaign and the coalition. We meet once a month. The back of the brochure has the location and time. We actually are going to start meeting at 6 p.m. and not 7:30 like the brochure says. So if you're interested, visit us on Facebook. Feel free to contact me or attend a meeting, because we really need a lot of community support to keep momentum going and make sure stores are not selling these products, and also to encourage local elected officials to make stronger laws to stop the sale of these drugs.
So they're required to do a teaching presentation for this class. So do you have places where you need people to go out and do presentations that you would have that opportunity?
Yeah, I have a lot of places. So if you want to connect and we can figure out where they're comfortable doing their presentation, if they want to ask questions about some of the information, because they've got a lot of information today, I can work with them.
Okay. So would they be able to use a PowerPoint similar to this?
Uh-huh.
Or need to come up with, okay.
No, I can give them a copy of it, and they can adjust it to their needs.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.